It arrived in the mailbox without warning, sometime in the weeks before Christmas or the weeks after. The timing never quite mattered, because when it came, everything else stopped. Not a magazine, not a flyer, a book. Thick enough to prop open a window, heavy enough that a 12-year-old had to carry it with both hands. On the cover, aircraft and cars and boats arranged against a clean white background, and a return address from Champaign, Illinois, a college town in the middle of a cornfield that most of America had never heard of and would never visit. Inside, 294 pages of everything a boy could want and nothing he could yet afford. A generation of American hobbyists grew up with this catalog on the floor in front of them. They read it the way other people read novels. They dog-eared the pages. They circled items in pencil. They memorized prices for products they would not own for years. And then one day, without ceremony, without announcement, it stopped coming. What killed the catalog that built a generation? And why does its absence still feel, to the men who grew up with it, like losing something they can't quite name? In 1971, Bruce Holchek was an engineering student at the University of Illinois in Champaign, a young man with a passion for radio-controlled models, an MBA he was working toward, and exactly $800 in personal savings. He was living in Illini Tower, a student housing block on the edge of campus, when he made a decision that most people in his position would have called reckless. He bought a small inventory of RC products. He wrote up an advertisement. He mailed it out. And he named the company after the building he was living in because that was where it began, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. There was no venture capital, no business plan formatted for a bank, no warehouse, no storefront, no staff. There was Bruce, and there was his younger brother Mark, still in high school at the time, packing orders in the basement of the Holchek family home and carrying them to the post office. The whole operation fit in a residential neighborhood. Nobody outside a small circle of RC enthusiasts knew it existed. But Bruce Holchek knew something that most people in 1971 did not yet fully understand. The RC hobby was about to grow, and the men who wanted to participate in it were scattered across the country with no reliable way to find the equipment they needed. Local hobby shops, where they existed at all, carried limited stock. Manufacturers sold through distributors, who sold through retailers, who marked up prices at every step. The hobbyist at the end of that chain paid more, waited longer, and often couldn't find what he was looking for anyway. Mail order changed that equation entirely. One company, one catalog, direct to the customer's door. No middleman markups beyond what the operation itself required. It was, in its way, a radical idea, not politically, not philosophically, but practically. It solved a real problem for real people. And Bruce Holchek understood that a solved problem, reliably solved, at a fair price, would keep customers coming back. By 1975, Tower Hobbies' annual sales had crossed $1 million. That milestone gave Bruce and his wife, Jerry, who had been running the company alongside him from the beginning, handling operations while he finished his degree and began teaching general engineering at the university, the means to move out of the family basement and into a dedicated building for the first time. A real warehouse, a real office, space to grow into. Mark Holchek finished his own degree in 1976 and sold his share of the company back to Bruce. By 1978, Tower Hobbies was pulling in $4.8 million a year, making it the largest mail-order radio control retailer in the hobby industry. The catalog that year ran to 294 pages, covering aircraft, boats, cars, engines, radios, and every accessory a serious hobbyist could need. Over 75,000 customers had accounts on file in Champaign, Illinois. From $800 in a dormitory room to the largest operation of its kind in the country in 7 years. For a long time, it was enough, more than enough. By 1980, the Tower Hobbies catalog had grown to 406 pages. That number means nothing until you hold one, until you understand that this was not a sales flyer, not a promotional booklet, not the thin glossy insert that falls out of a Sunday newspaper. This was a document. It weighed more than most hardcover books. It covered radio-controlled aircraft, helicopters, boats, cars, tanks, motorcycles, and, in 1980, even an RC blimp. It listed products from manufacturers in the United States, Japan, and West Germany. It carried technical specifications, compatibility notes, engine performance charts, and product descriptions written with enough detail that a serious hobbyist could make an informed decision without ever speaking to a salesperson. Men who grew up with this catalog do not describe it the way they describe a store. They describe it the way they describe a place. You came home from school and it was on the kitchen table, or it was already on the floor of your bedroom because your father had set it aside for you without saying anything about it. You did not flip through it. You read it, cover to cover, or close enough, starting at the front and working your way through sections you didn't fully understand yet, learning the language of the hobby from the descriptions themselves. Proportional radio systems, glow plug engines, servo torque ratings. You absorbed the vocabulary the same way you absorbed everything at that age, by repetition, by proximity, by wanting badly enough to understand. The dog-eared pages came later, the pencil circles, the running tallies in the margins of what things cost versus what you had saved. Some boys kept lists, some memorized prices the way other kids memorized batting averages. A particular Futaba radio system, a specific OS engine, a Kyosho kit that cost more than a week of lawn mowing money, but sat in the catalog like a promise. Something to work toward, something that existed in the world and could theoretically be yours. The ritual of ordering was its own event. You filled out the order form, printed in the back of the catalog, perforated along one edge so it tore out cleanly. And you listed the item numbers you had memorized. You wrote a check, or your parents did. You sealed the envelope, you mailed it, and then you waited. 2 weeks, sometimes 3. The UPS truck came down your street every afternoon, and for those 2 or 3 weeks, you heard it differently. You tracked its progress from 2 houses away by sound alone. When the package arrived, it was carefully wrapped. Tower Hobbies said so in the catalog itself, and they meant it. The company processed more than 650 orders every single day out of its Champaign facility. And still the packages arrived intact, the items correct, the invoice matching what you had written down. Tower Hobbies had been the first company in the RC hobby industry to install a toll-free 800 number. You could call Champaign, Illinois from anywhere in the country and speak to someone who knew what a needle valve was. They were also the first to implement an IBM mainframe computer for order processing and inventory tracking, which meant that the machine running behind the scenes in that warehouse was more sophisticated than what most American businesses were using at the time. The company that looked from the outside like a catalog operation run by hobbyists was, on the inside, a logistics and technology company that happened to sell RC equipment. By the early 1980s, Tower Hobbies had 100 employees. It served more than 100,000 customers. It stocked products from over 300 manufacturers. Before sunrise on any given workday, the phones were already ringing. On hobbyist forums decades later, men in their 50s and 60s would try to explain what the catalog meant to them and run out of language for it. One called it the reference manual of the hobby. Another said he still had catalogs from the late 80s that he referred back to for part numbers. A third said he remembered waiting for each new edition the way other people waited for a favorite magazine. That particular thickness in the mailbox, that particular weight. None of them knew the catalog had already begun dying. The orders were still coming in. The phones were still ringing. The warehouse in Champaign was still running 3 shifts. Nobody thought to ask what would happen when the catalog no longer needed to exist. In 1985, Bruce Holchek sold Tower Hobbies. There was no public drama around the decision, no hostile takeover, no creditor pressure, no crisis that forced his hand. Champaign businessman Clint Atkins brought together Tower Hobbies and Great Plains Model Distributors, a separate RC operation founded by Don Anderson, also based in Champaign, under a single corporate parent called Hobbico. Holchek's company became a division. The founder stepped away. The catalog kept coming. From the outside, nothing changed. The Tower Hobbies name remained on the cover. The address was still Champaign, Illinois. The toll-free number still worked. Customers who had been ordering for a decade noticed nothing different in the pages themselves. The same product categories, the same format, the same comprehensive coverage that had made the catalog essential reading for anyone serious about the hobby. But the company that produced it was no longer the company Bruce Holchek had built from a dormitory room. It was now a division inside a larger corporate structure, with obligations and priorities that extended beyond the catalog itself. That distinction would not matter for a while, then it would matter enormously. The first structural crack appeared not in Champaign, but everywhere else simultaneously. and it arrived in the form of a telephone number. In 1995, Tower Hobbies launched Tower Hobbies. One of the earliest e-commerce websites in the hobby industry, and one of the earlier retail websites of any kind in the United States. The move was logical, even visionary. Tower had always been a direct-to-consumer operation. The internet was simply a faster, cheaper version of the same idea. No printing costs, no postage, no annual production cycle. Customers could browse the full inventory at any hour, place an order without filling out a paper form, and receive a confirmation immediately rather than waiting to see whether their envelope had arrived safely in Illinois. It was, by every operational measure, an improvement. It was also the beginning of the end of the thing that made Tower Hobbies irreplaceable. The catalog had never been merely a purchasing mechanism. It was a medium, a specific physical annual experience that existed in a particular relationship with the reader. You could not browse a catalog the way you browsed a website. The catalog came to you once a year, on its own schedule, and demanded your attention in a way that a URL never could. It sat on your floor. It occupied physical space in your home. It persisted. A website could be closed with a single keystroke and forgotten by the next morning. Through the late 1990s, the catalog continued to arrive, but the pages were changing. The 1991 edition had already shrunk from 406 pages to 288, a reduction that longtime customers noticed and mentioned, though nobody called it alarming yet. The hobby was still growing. Tower was still the dominant mail-order name in the industry. There was enough momentum to absorb the early losses without confronting what they meant. Then Amazon opened its doors to third-party sellers. Then eBay gave individual hobbyists a way to buy and sell directly with each other. Then RC forums replaced the catalog as the place where the community gathered to share knowledge, compare products, and argue about engine tuning. The information that Tower Hobbies had once delivered in 400 pages of dense print was now available online, continuously updated, free of charge, from sources that had no printing schedule to maintain. The catalog had always been two things at once, a shopping tool and a community resource. The internet did not just replace the shopping tool, it replaced both simultaneously, and did so without anyone issuing a formal announcement. Hobbico's corporate structure added a pressure of its own. As Tower Hobbies became more deeply integrated into the parent company's distribution network, the catalog's independence narrowed. Tower could not freely stock products that competed with Hobbico's own brands or its exclusive distribution agreements. An operation that had once carried equipment from every significant manufacturer in the industry was now constrained by corporate logic that had nothing to do with what hobbyists actually wanted. The catalog that readers had trusted as a comprehensive reference was quietly becoming something more limited, a curated selection shaped by business relationships rather than by the full breadth of the hobby. The catalog was still arriving in mailboxes, but fewer people were reading it the same way anymore. The 2010 Tower Hobbies catalog arrived in mailboxes that year, and almost nobody remarked on what it represented. 240 pages, wider than the old editions, a different trim size, a more modern layout, but thinner than any catalog Tower Hobbies had produced since the early years when the company was still finding its footing. Hobbyists who had been ordering since the late 1970s did the math without being asked. 406 pages in 1980, 288 in 1991, 240 in 2010. The trajectory was not subtle, but it had moved slowly enough that each individual reduction felt like an adjustment rather than a collapse. On the RC Universe forums, a hobbyist posted about the new catalog shortly after it arrived. He mentioned that he had a 1991 edition he had found in his garage, and that even that one had felt thin compared to what he remembered from the 1980s. Then he noted, without particular emotion, that the new catalog had only 4 pages of airplane accessories. 4 pages. In the 1980 edition, the airplane section alone had run for dozens of pages. Engines sorted by displacement, kits organized by wing configuration, radio systems compared across manufacturers. Accessories listed with enough specificity that a builder could source every component for a scratch build without making a single phone call. That depth of coverage had been the point. It had been the reason serious hobbyists kept their Tower catalogs on the shelf alongside their technical manuals, referring back to them for part numbers and specifications years after the prices had changed. 4 pages of airplane accessories was not a catalog. It was a reminder that a catalog had once existed. The corporate constraints that had been tightening since the Hobbico merger were now fully visible in the pages themselves. Tower Hobbies could not stock Cyto engines because Horizon Hobby held the exclusive distribution rights for that brand, and Hobbico, Tower's parent, distributed OS engines, which competed directly. What had once been the hobby industry's most comprehensive single source had become, by structural necessity, a showcase for the brands that Hobbico owned or controlled. The catalog was no longer a mirror of the hobby. It was a catalog of a portion of the hobby, selected by corporate agreement rather than by what hobbyists were actually buying and building. The men who noticed this did not write angry letters. They simply went elsewhere. They went to the forums first, where other hobbyists pointed them toward products that Tower no longer carried. Then they went to the manufacturer's own websites, where they could order direct. Then they found smaller specialty retailers who stocked the specific brands and components they needed. The migration happened gradually, one purchase at a time, and each purchase made outside of Tower Hobbies made the next one slightly easier to justify. Habit is a powerful retention tool, but habit requires reinforcement. When the catalog stopped delivering the full experience it had once promised, the habit began to erode. What was lost in that erosion was harder to quantify than market share. The catalog had functioned as a connective tissue for a dispersed community. In the years before online forums, before email lists, before any of the digital infrastructure that now organizes hobbyist life, the Tower Hobbies catalog had been one of the primary ways that RC enthusiasts across the country understood what was available, what was new, what other builders were using, and what the state of the hobby looked like at any given moment. A man in rural Kansas and a man in suburban Connecticut received the same catalog in the same week and shared, without ever meeting, a common reference point. They knew the same prices. They were considering the same products. The catalog created a kind of community by simply existing in the same form in 100,000 different homes. When it shrank, that shared reference point shrank with it. When it disappeared, the community did not disappear. It reconstituted itself online, in fragments across dozens of forums and Facebook groups and YouTube channels. But something in the reconstitution was different. The online hobby community was faster, louder, and more immediate than the catalog had ever been. It was also less coherent. There was no single document that everyone had read. There was no shared object that sat on the floor of 100,000 living rooms simultaneously. On RC10 Talk, one of the vintage RC community's most active forums, a member mentioned that he had spent years collecting physical catalogs from the 1980s and early 1990s with the intention of scanning and archiving them. He had obtained a heavy-duty paper guillotine specifically to cut the bindings off so the pages could feed through a document scanner. Someone else in the thread called that heartbreaking. The collector acknowledged it. He said he considered it a sacrifice for the greater good, that the end justified the means, even if he wished there were an easier way that didn't require destroying the original objects. That exchange, buried in a forum thread that most people never read, said everything about what the catalog had become, an artifact valuable enough to preserve, fragile enough to be destroyed by the act of preservation itself. By 2010, the catalog was still being printed, but it was a pamphlet now. The Bible had become a flyer. Nobody announced that the 2010 catalog was the last one. That is the thing about endings that arrive without ceremony. They are only recognized as endings in retrospect, when enough time has passed that the absence becomes undeniable. The catalog had always come on its own schedule, irregular enough that a gap of several months between editions never triggered alarm. Customers who had been ordering since the Carter administration understood that the printing cycle was annual, not clockwork. Some years, it arrived in late summer. Some years, it came closer to the holidays. You waited, and eventually it appeared. And then one year, it didn't. There was no press release from Champaign, no letter to longtime customers explaining the decision, no final edition printed with a note inside acknowledging what it was. The catalog simply stopped, the way things stop when the people responsible for them have decided that the economics no longer justify the continuation, and have moved on to the next decision before anyone outside the building has processed what the previous one meant. The man who received the 2010 catalog and set it on his workbench without knowing it was the last one did exactly what he had done every year before. He flipped through it. He noted a few items. He set it aside to look at again later. Later became weeks, and the weeks became the following spring, and by then a new edition should have arrived, and hadn't. And he went to the website instead because the website had what he needed and he was busy and there were things to build. He may still have that catalog somewhere, in a drawer or a box in the garage, or on a shelf in the basement, next to editions from 1987 and 1993 and 2004. If he does, he almost certainly does not think of it as the last one. It does not have that quality yet, the quality that objects acquire when their context has been fully explained to them by time. It is just the 2010 catalog. It is just the one that happened to be the last. Contrast that with the 1978 edition, the one that arrived in the mailbox of a 12-year-old in the autumn of a year when the catalog had just crossed 294 pages for the first time, and the hobby was still young enough that simply owning the catalog felt like membership in something. That boy did not treat it casually. He carried it to his room and set it on the floor and lay down in front of it and began at page 1. He read the company's description of itself, the largest, fastest, friendliest radio control mail-order company in the world, processing more than 350 orders every day, serving customers in all 50 states. And he believed it. The way you believe things when you are 12, and the evidence in front of you is 400 pages thick. He read the engine section first, because engines were what he understood least and wanted most to understand. Then the radio section. Then the aircraft kits, organized by wingspan, each one accompanied by a photograph and a description that told him how long it would take to build and what skill level it required. He made a list in pencil on the inside back cover. 3 items. The total came to more than $200, which was an impossible number in 1978 for a boy with a paper route and a jar of quarters on his dresser. He made the list anyway, because making the list was its own form of ownership, a declaration of intention, a record of desire, a way of holding on to something that existed in the catalog before it could exist in his hands. He ordered from Tower Hobbies for the next 30 years. By the time the 2010 catalog arrived, he was in his mid-40s. He had built more kits than he could count, had gone through 4 different radio systems, had transitioned from glow engines to electric power sometime in the mid-2000s, when the battery technology finally made it practical. He ordered online now, mostly faster, easier, no envelope to address. But he still liked getting the catalog. He still liked having something physical to hold while he thought about what to build next. He still liked the ritual of it, even in its diminished form. The ritual ended without his consent and without his knowledge, in a year when he had other things to think about. The website was faster. It had more products than any printed catalog could ever list. It had customer reviews and video demonstrations and a search function that could locate a specific servo by torque rating in under 3 seconds. It had everything a hobbyist needed. It had everything except the reason people used to read it. The mailbox at the end of the driveway still gets filled every day. Grocery store flyers, credit card offers, a bill or two, sometimes a package from an online retailer, brown cardboard with a printed label, no return address worth remembering, nothing from Champaign, Illinois, nothing that requires both hands to carry, nothing that a 12-year-old would set on the floor of his bedroom and read from page 1. That will not change. There is no edition in production. There is no printing schedule being planned in a warehouse on the edge of a college town in the Midwest. The catalog is not delayed. It is not forthcoming. It is finished, in the way that things finish when the world that made them necessary has been replaced by a world that cannot imagine needing them. Tower Hobbies still exists as a website. TowerHobbies.com, now operating as a division of Horizon Hobby, which acquired the brand out of the Hobbico bankruptcy proceedings in 2018. The site is clean and fast and stocked with thousands of products. Orders ship quickly. Customer service is reachable. By every measurable standard of modern retail, it functions better than the mail-order operation that Bruce Holchek built from $800 and a dormitory room in 1971. Nobody reads it before falling asleep. The physical catalogs that survived from the 1970s and 1980s have become collector's items, not because they are rare exactly, but because the people who kept them understand, in a way that is difficult to articulate, that they are holding something that cannot be reprinted. Editions from 1978 and 1980 and 1983 appear on eBay with some regularity, listed by men who are clearing out a garage or settling an estate, bought by men who want to hold the object again, or for the first time, or who want to show it to a son who cannot quite understand why a catalog would be worth paying for. On Internet Archive, Volunteers have uploaded scanned versions of multiple Tower Hobbies editions, the 1978-1979 catalog, the 1980-1981 catalog, the 2010 catalog, digitized page by page, freely accessible to anyone with an internet connection. The scans are clean. The text is legible. Every product listing, every price, every technical specification is preserved exactly as it appeared in print. They are also completely without weight, without smell, without the particular texture of pages that have been turned hundreds of times by hands that were planning something. The digital version of the 1980 catalog is an accurate record of what the catalog contained. It is not the catalog. It cannot be dog-eared. It cannot be carried to the floor of a bedroom. It cannot accumulate the history of a reader inside its margins. The men who grew up with Tower Hobbies catalogs are in their 60s now, most of them. Some are still building. Electric aircraft in the backyard, RC cars on weekends, kits started and finished and started again, because the building was always as much the point as the flying. Some have set the hobby aside, the way you set things aside when your knees hurt and your eyes need more light than they used to, and the grandchildren take up the hours that the workbench used to fill. Some kept their catalogs, some threw them away during a move and have regretted it in a way that is disproportionate to the object itself, a disproportionate regret that is in fact perfectly proportionate to what the object actually was. Somewhere in a garage in the Midwest, there is a cardboard box with 30 years of Tower Hobbies catalog stacked inside. The man who saved them is in his 60s now. He does not take them out often. He does not need to reference them for part numbers anymore. And the prices are so far from current reality that they read like history, which is exactly what they are. He kept them because he could not make himself throw them away. And he has never examined that impulse closely enough to explain it to anyone, including himself. He knows what is in the box. He has always known. On the floor of a bedroom a long time ago, a boy made a list in pencil on the inside back cover of a catalog from Champaign, Illinois. 3 items, $200, an impossible number. He never threw that list away either.